against the truth is, as it was happened. We did not know, the judge know, only the God knows it. So, how would you describe it? Is maintain is legal or illegal? It's very important. So it's the power of language, right? Okay.
In other words, how you describe the pictures may determine whether it's a illegal act or a legal act, right? You all have different interpretations. He wants to say the man is trying to abuse the dog, but who knows? We can't read the mind of the man. We all look at the pictures and interpret from the signs.
Finally, we come to conclusion. The first, legal language made a simple complex. Do you think so? No, I think it's very confused. Right. The legal language can hit your real purpose. Yes or no? I think it's very functional. Okay. Third.
So your answer is yes, yes.
Yes.
With all these statements, right?
Yeah.
Number one, legal language makes the simple complex. Yes or no? Yes.
Yes.
Number two. Legal language can hide your real purposes. Yes or no?
Yes. Okay, yes. And the third, legal language gives you a chance to make white become black.
Yes or no?
Like dog cats. Yes? Okay. So, the last but not least, do not believe the law school student. It's very important. Poor English, but very charming. Okay? Okay, thank you.
Benson really has important points to make. But since this is the first time he has ever presented an issue related to law in English, unlike most of you who might have more experience in speaking or writing in English, this is really his first time doing a public presentation in English. So he has done his very best. So I still want to give him, Okay, thank you. Basically, after we discussed medical parole, I checked with Benson because I wanted to find out from a law expert the Taiwan regulation, the Taiwan law of medical parole. And I found out there's just a difference between the U.S. law and the Taiwan law. But the spirit is still the same, okay? That's why Benson said, Ma Ying-jiu doesn't want to release Chen. That's why he only spoke half of the truth. In other words, if he cited U.S. law, it's true that medical parole means release. That's the U.S. law. But he didn't mention the Taiwan law. The Taiwan law defines medical parole as in suspension of imprisonment. Suspension of imprisonment under certain circumstances. Number one, if this prisoner is insane, if he's a lunatic or just becomes crazy, then he can be released. As long as he keeps insane, he keeps crazy for the rest of his life, he doesn't have to come back to the prison. Okay, so that's the other half of the truth. So I really want to thank Benson for sharing his expertise on this issue. So it really made the case very clear to me what's going on. So I just wanted to complete the puzzle, complete the picture, because I only talked about half of the truth. I didn't understand the Taiwan law, but after Benson gave us the other half, it becomes crystal clear. And Benson also challenged us of interpreting events, right, by raising those issues. For example, he showed two pictures of a person playing or interacting with a dog, and how you define the action may make it a criminal case or just a loving case, right? So it's the use of language sometimes makes a difference. I think Stone, look up in the dictionary. What is this?
Deponent is a person who testifies or give a deposition in the court. It's like a witness.
Okay, so that's again a legal term, deponent, like a 证人, right? Just a 证人. Okay, so I really appreciate our law expert here to share his expertise. Okay. All right, remember Benson just mentioned don't believe in law school students, right? He also mentioned there are a lot of problems with legal language. However, it's a necessary evil. It's a necessary evil. Let's look at chapter 2 of our textbook to find out the need for legal language. There is still a place for legal language, whether you like it or not. Here's an example of written legal statutes. Actually Benson showed us some examples too, right? The two laws. Is it necessary to have legal language? There has been two sides. One is, yes, legal language has a high degree of precision and inclusivity that is required by the genre, right? Remember, Benson said there are so many cases which are not covered in a definition, right? What does it mean to say take another person's life? Do you have to use a gun or a knife? Or can you simply pray and somebody died? Can you say you take the other person's life, right? That's, again, is the problem of definition. What is to take another person's life? Remember, we discussed the problem of definition. That's another good example. Okay, but the other side says, no, there's really no need to make simple things so complex. Okay, so there's a movement called Plain English Campaign, Plain English Movement, trying to get rid of this complicated language to make things straightforward, daily conversation, make it easy. All right? But you can see that there is a need for legal language, for legal English. Then what is legal English? Let's look at David Crystal's definition. If you look at legal English or legal Chinese is a different matter. Let's focus on legal English. First of all, we see modal verbs in legal English. There are many must, shall, and may, right? That's the first feature. The second feature is there are many pronouns, like all, whoever, that's the second feature. You also see generic nouns. For example, all the hypernyms. For example, bird is a hypernym. But you have other hyponyms under your hypernym. A bird can be a robin, a sparrow, a peacock, an ostrich, a turkey, or a penguin, right? You can list all the examples or members of a bird. Again, a bird is a generic noun. It's a hypernym. For example, vehicle or person are also hypernyms. But under hypernyms, we need to have many examples, right? That's hyponyms. Certainty can be promoted by explicitly listing specific items. That's hyponyms. In order to make legal language inclusive, you have to include all the cases no exception, so that it's not, there's no debate that you need to include every single hyponym. For example, what is considered a valid ballot? 合法的选票 valid ballot, right? I already gave you examples of all kinds of peripheral cases. However, they are still considered valid. Those are hyponyms of valid ballot. Okay? We also have to list invalid ballot, all examples of invalid cases. That's legal language. All right? Next, when it comes to, well, how do we say TO? How do we categorize to? In everyday English, to is an infinitive, right? To do something. To do. To is an infinitive, right? But in legal contracts, in legal language, to is more often used as a preposition, showing direction, going to someplace. Okay, like to go to someplace. The first to is an infinitive. The second to someplace is a preposition. In everyday English, we use to as an infinitive. But in legal English, in contracts, to is most often used as a preposition. Okay? And infinitive is less frequent than preposition in legal contracts. Next, when it comes to these connectives, and or, right, these connectives. When I ask you, would you like coffee or tea? What does that mean? That doesn't mean both, right? For example, Peggy, would you like coffee or tea? Okay, coffee, please. Or tea, please. In other words, or, it indicates alternative choice. Alternative, either or, right? But in legal English, many times or means both, which means and. You know, both. When they use or, they actually mean inclusive use. If you read, say, law, you know, some act, himself or another, debit or credit, credits or debits, these or are all inclusive or. So that's another example, another feature of legal English. Then, when it comes to some kind of thorny cases, you have to decide whether you mean and or, right? Do you mean alternative or inclusive? Then there's room for different interpretations. That's why sometimes, you know, we can interpret it this way or that way. Then you either win the case or lose the case, depending on how you interpret your or. Okay, this is an example in your book. And equals or. Another feature of legal language is it's full of these kind of things. For example, a lot of Latinisms. You read things like prima facie, bona fide, or archaic adverbs like hereinafter, thereunder, or specific prepositional phrases like pursuant to, at the instance of, okay? And a lot of performative constructions, for example, X hereby agrees or confers. These are all legal features. All right? So you can see, of course, there's also punctuation. That's another problem. Punctuation, or the lack of punctuation, which can also create problems. Now, let's look at hypernym versus hyponym. Say we have a regulation on when to sound your horn, okay? Horn, 喇叭, horn. In British English, you can't simply say horn because there are two horns. Horn 1 is animal horn. Horn 2 is ba-ba horn, okay? So the second horn is a audible warning instrument. Therefore, in legal English, in British English, they need to create a hypernym, which is called audible warning instrument. Audible warning instrument. But in American English, there's no need to create another hypernym to mean horn. Okay, so you can see legal English has its place. It's simply to disambiguate, sometimes disambiguate language. All right, and I have some YouTube links. You can take a look. And why is legal English incomprehensible? Why is it difficult to understand? As you can see, on the one hand, legal English has to cover as much as possible. On the other hand, legal English has to be as specific as possible. All right, so there are two conflicting issues here. On the one hand, its statements have to be so phrased that we can see the general applicability, it applies to many, many cases, right? Its applicability, yet be specific enough to apply to individual circumstances. So you have to have applicability, cover all kinds of things. On the other hand, you need to be very specific about individual things. That's not easy. Human language doesn't work that way. Human language many times is very ambiguous. You know, you have to make inferences a lot of times. For example, when you see that a man interacting with a dog, you have to come up with some inferences. You didn't really see what happened, but you have to guess, right? You have to guess. Then how did you guess whether the man is friendly to the dog or unfriendly, abusive to the dog? That's all your interpretations based on your experience and based on all kinds of possibilities. However, when it comes to law, you can't work that way, right? You have to make it, that's why legal language is so incomprehensible. It's not natural. It's very artificial. It creates some kind of monster, which are both, you know, cover everything. On the other hand, very specific about every single thing. That's really unnatural. That's why it's difficult. All right. You can also see when it comes to even definition, when, for example, a woman, all right. For example, a woman who is dancing who is flesh erotic dancers, okay, who are doing something illegal, dancing, strip dancers, or taking off her clothes. The police have to stop her from doing that. But then we have to define what is buttocks. 屁股是什么意思? Buttocks. Okay? Here's the legal language which defines, where is your buttocks? If you read this carefully, you will see it's really a joke. It's really incomprehensible. Incomprehensible, but a police has to use this as a yardstick to to measure whether this is strictly